My guests are Eva Maria Everson and her daughter Jessica.
They can't get into heaven on your coattails.
Absolutely.
Seems right. Convictions must be strong. Pierce the darkness with the light as you go along. Living with one foot in heaven, breaking the enemy's power. In the strength of Jesus, we can stand in the darkest hour. Living with one foot in heaven, ready when He calls our name. For believers to live is Christ, to die is only gain.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today my guests are Eva Maria Everson and her daughter Jessica. I wanted to interview these women because they wrote a book that I think is absolutely wonderful. It's actually out of print, but you can still get copies of it. It's called Sex, Lies, and the Media, What Your Kids Know and Aren't Telling You. They've also written other books. Why don't you tell us about some of your other books?
We also wrote Sex Lies in High School, which came out right after Sex Lies in the Media. Basically, all the information that we had, we just couldn't get it into one book.
And what part did you play in the writing?
Well, I brought basically the bridge. I bridged the gap between the current generation and the past generation to help adults become more relevant to the youth, whoever it is that they're involved with, and so they can be there as guide stones and things like that for the children. Because otherwise, if they're not relevant, basically their ears shut.
There were some parts in this book that I marked because they were so good. And Eva wrote, certain messages parents cannot ignore when it comes to sexual trends in the media. What kind of messages can't we ignore?
Clothing, even sometimes body art. You want to be very careful about that. I was sharing with someone the other day, when Jessica was about 15 years old, she came in and said, "What do you think about a belly button ring?" And I said, I hadn't really thought about it. And so she left the room and she came back 10 minutes later, she had a belly button ring. And she said, "I just pierced my own belly button." I'm like, wait a minute, But you know what, I did make a big deal out of it. And my husband said, "Well, does it mean anything?" And she said, "No, it's just a fashion statement." And about 2 weeks later, she took it out and we never saw it again. But there are some things you want to be very, very much aware of. Fashion, obviously, is a big, big key. Music. What's on television. In my home, we still have a teenager, so we blocked MTV, VH1, and a lot of the stations like that. It's really not so much about music anymore. It's about introducing the kids to a lifestyle.
One of the things you wrote in here, I believe this was yours, that I just loved. It says, "Run to the battle line, meet the giant head on with the weapon you have in your hand, which is the truth. You are literally armed with the power of the Holy Spirit of God."
That's right. Yeah, don't take for granted the power that God has given you, the authority that God has given you as the parent of the child. You have the ultimate responsibility over this child, and you better take it seriously. So run to the battle, and don't be afraid to fight for the spiritual life of your child, sometimes the life of your child.
Yeah, that's true. Now, Jessica, you wrote, "You cannot argue or force the truth. The truth must be discovered, and I believe that only God can put it in our hearts."
When your children are young, it's very easy to tell them which way to go and what things to do. They hit a certain point where they want to become themselves, and they should. And that's where you have to begin to trust the foundation that you've instilled in them. But at that point, your methods have to change maybe a little bit in your ways that you get through to them. Just meeting them where they are instead of asking them to come to where you are. Understanding that at some point your children will have to find their own faith.
That's right.
And no longer be able to rest on yours.
They can't get into heaven on your coattails.
Absolutely.
That's true.
When they're little, you can guide them, you can shape them, and at some point they're going to start questioning, they're going to start asking. Be ready with an answer. If they can trust you to come to you when they're little, they can trust you to come to you when they're older. And understand that if they're questioning it, it's a good thing. Yeah. It's not a bad thing. Let them question it, but be ready with the answer. That's part of the problem. I think so many adult Christians know what they believe, but they don't know why they believe it. They need to know why they believe what they believe so they can pass that on to their children.
And how would you suggest they find out why they believe?
I think they have to start questioning their own beliefs. Why do I believe this? Know the Word. No more than just the word, because you can't argue the word with the word. You know what I'm saying? You need to know why you believe this. And sometimes, for some it means, if your children come to you and they say, I've decided I want to be of another faith, okay, for whatever reason, what do you know about that other faith? How can you match it up with Christianity? What arguments would you make? And so sometimes instead of just closing that door, say, okay, why do you want to become a part of that faith? And let's start looking at it and let's start laying it beside Christianity and be willing to explore that with them. I have a heart for Israel.
Yes.
And one of the things that I have learned is in Judaism is that it's an honor almost to argue with God. They debate the scriptures. It's not that they're questioning God. It's that they're saying, I really want to know you, and I want to know this. And if I want to know you and I want to know this, that means I'm going to have to dig a little bit. That means I'm going to have to ask the questions, well, why did you do this? How is it that God did that? What made him choose this and that? Even if we think about the Passion of the Christ, it was such an enormous thing that Christ did. Why? Why did it have to be so gruesome? Why did it have to be at that point in time? And as your children grow older, maybe start exploring those things with them. And don't be afraid to say, hey, let's question what it is that we believe so that we know what it is that we believe.
Jessica, how old are you now?
29.
29. So do you feel at all that there's a disconnect between you and the teenagers now?
Oh, well, I can say without a doubt that right about the time I left my high school years, things started to progress at a rate that nowhere near the way that they were progressing when I was in high school, and not for the better. So the gap between my generation and the one right behind mine is probably a lot wider than the gap between mine and the one right before me. But that does not mean that it can't be bridged. It's just that you have to be willing to accept that as a fact instead of fighting it. And you have to understand a little bit more the world that the youth is navigating. It's not the world you're navigating, and it's not the world you navigated at their age. There, of course, are similarities. We know there's nothing new under the sun. But it's different, and that's part of being relevant. You need to step inside of their minds and understand the struggles that they have. Because it is. And just to tell a young person what not to do, one of the main reasons is they're going to have a hard time listening to you is they're going to feel that you don't understand why it's hard or why they don't want to do that. And so being willing to be open in the beginning, and it's so easy for us as adults to want to tell right away and preach right away. Yeah. And that may not be what they need, and chances are it's not. Allow them to teach you about their world for as long as it takes for you to understand before you begin to try to impart your wisdom into their world.
Do you think after you do that they will be open to it, or are there more things that we have to do?
I tell my mom and other adults, just because a child doesn't seem receptive, or a youth, teenager especially, doesn't seem receptive, doesn't mean that they're not. Sometimes it's getting in there when they're quiet. Also, I find a lot of times that, let's say you're a parent and your child comes home, how was school today? They don't want to say anything. It seems to be that adults tend to give up right before the teenager begins to speak. It's not that they don't want to share with you. It's just that when you're a teenager and the hormones, it's all about timing, and it's all about so many things that we're not really thinking about.
And they come home from school and they're trying to process what happened at school today. They can't even really vocalize it quite yet.
Absolutely.
So maybe you need to find something like, well, let's go get an ice cream cone. Or I remember one time Jessica was closing down with me, we were to the beach. We rented videos, we laid out, we popped popcorn, we were listening to the crashing surf, and then we just started gabbing.
Let those things come out naturally.
Just let it happen naturally.
And that's the thing I remember, even in my harder times, I always wanted to share those things with my parents. Even those things that I knew they wouldn't approve of. My desire was always to share them. Was always to share them, but that fear of it not being okay. You want to make sure that your children are comfortable sharing those things with you, even if they go against your faith and what you've taught them.
So they need to feel unconditional love.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that they're not all automatically going to be met with an argument or a sermon. Then lets them know that you care.
Right. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Israel book?
Reflections of God's Holy Land, A Personal Journey Through Israel, was written with my good friend Miriam Feinberg Vamosh, who lives in Jerusalem, right outside of Jerusalem in Har Adar. It's kind of one of the books of my heart.
And you pour out your heart in that book.
I thank you. It has our photography in it. We went to over 44, I think it was about 44, 45 sites. Miriam has her master's degree in archaeology and heritage. She has led tours, Christian tours, for over 35 years, and she brings the knowledge from archaeology, from the heritage, from the rabbinical, being Jewish. She brings the historical, the traditional, and all of that, the biblical, all of that. She brings this knowledge. So she is like a walking tour guide for the reader. And then we have, of course, the visual, which is the photographs. But then in each site, I sat down and allowed the Holy Spirit just to kind of write through me. And I don't want to sound like I was channeling God or anything, but just to say, what am I experiencing here? From a sensory perspective, what am I sensing? And how can I bring the reader with me so that they can see it and feel it and touch it and smell it and, all of that. It's all right there for them too.
It is. It's so heartfelt. I just absolutely love your writing. I
Thank
use
you.
it as examples when I'm teaching about writing.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I love your writing. It's wonderful.
Well, thanks.
Your novels are that way too.
Well, thank you. I say I'm the Southern voice for Baker Revell, and getting ready to start a blog. I think I'm going to call it the Southern Voice. Yeah, just to kind of talk about Southernisms and what makes us different down here.
And you have a website.
EvaMarieEverson.com, and then I also have a blog site, One Writer, One Day, and there's a running series right now called Come Heal With Me, and that's kind of following along with my grieving process. Just lost my mother, and having just lost my father not too long, not too far in the distant past before that. And we've all lost something along the way, especially in this last year. I find that I hear people, I lost my job, I lost a spouse, I lost my parent, I lost my mind, something. and it's just, at first I was going to call it Come Grieve With Me. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound very good, because I'm grieving. But then I realized that in the grieving, there's healing. And so Come Heal With Me. I found a book of my mother. She was teaching from it when she died. And my mother had written notes in the margins. And so I start off with the words from the book, and then words from my mother, and then my own words. So
That's special.
It really is. It's such a
That's
gift. Yeah, it was such a gift she left behind. And I'm learning more about my mother's faith, which I already knew was phenomenal, but even more so. That there were times when my mother was afraid, and there was times I don't think that she ever doubted. But I think there were times when she wondered, how we were supposed to get through all of this. And
If it were easy, it wouldn't be faith.
no, absolutely.
We have to
Yeah.
have faith.
And I noticed how many times in the margins my mother wrote the names of God, Jehovah Rapha, Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Shalom, Sekenu. And I realized, boy, my mother really knew God. It's a wonderful legacy to be given.
It is.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And you're
And then passing it
that
on.
legacy,
Yeah,
yes.
that's right.
Which is what this show is all
Yeah.
about.
Yes,
So-
yay.
You always sign your emails with a Hebrew phrase.
Tova haaretz miod miod.
And what is that?
It is what when Joshua and Caleb came back. Remember when Moses sent the spies up into the Promised Land and bring us back with a report, and the others said, "Oh my goodness, there's giants in the land, and we look like grasshoppers, and they'll annihilate us." And Joshua and Caleb said, "Tova haaretz miod miod." It's the land that is very, very good.
And we are to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Yes,
And
yes.
God will bless those who
Yes.
bless Israel.
That's right. Sha'alu shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for
Thank
being
you.
my guests.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. And I hope to do it again sometime.
Absolutely.